As the morning sun cast golden rays through the airplane windows, Sarah Chen adjusted her navy blue scarf with practiced precision. Her perfectly pressed uniform and bright smile concealed the weariness of working a double shift, but her dedication to passenger service never wavered. Flight 247 from New York to San Francisco promised to be a full house, and Sarah was determined to maintain the airline's prestigious standards. The first-class cabin hummed with the usual pre-flight activity. Executives tapping away on laptops, celebrities hiding behind designer sunglasses, and seasoned travelers settling into their familiar routines. Yet one passenger in seat 14C stood out, not for his remarkable presence, but for his notable lack of first-class pretense. He wore faded jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and worn-in hiking boots, an ensemble more suited to economy class than the premium section. What caught Sarah's attention wasn't his attire, but rather his actions. While other passengers focused on their pre-flight routines, this man helped an elderly couple store their heavy carry-on bags, offered his phone charger to a stressed-looking businessman who had forgotten his, and smiled warmly at the flight crew. Sarah had served countless flights over her 12-year career, developing an intuition for reading passengers. This one puzzled her. His seat assignment clearly placed him in first class, but his behavior defied the typical passenger profile. Most first-class travelers maintained an invisible barrier between themselves and others, yet this man seemed to dissolve such boundaries effortlessly. As she conducted her pre-flight checks, Sarah observed him assisting a young mother struggling with a baby stroller in the jet bridge through the cabin window. The ground crew had already begun removing the stroller, but the mother appeared distressed about some items still inside. Without hesitation, the man from 14C helped her retrieve the baby's essentials before ground staff took the stroller away. "Excuse me, sir." Sarah approached him as he returned to his seat. "That was very kind of you to help." Her professional tone carried genuine appreciation. Anyone would have done the same. He replied with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His voice carried a hint of a Midwestern accent, another detail that seemed at odds with the first-class setting. Sarah continued her preparations, ensuring the gallery was properly stocked and checking the passenger manifest. The name listed for 14C was James Morrison, a common enough name that triggered no immediate recognition. Yet something about him suggested a story worth knowing. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, and Sarah took her position for the safety demonstration. As she demonstrated the oxygen mask procedure, she noticed Morrison watching attentively, another departure from the norm, as most first-class passengers typically ignored the familiar routine in favor of their phones or magazines. Through the cabin windows, New York's skyline gradually transformed from towering silhouettes to a glittering tapestry below. The early morning light painted the clouds in soft pink hues, creating a serene atmosphere in the cabin. Sarah began her initial beverage service, moving with practiced efficiency through the aisle. When she reached 14C, Morrison requested simply water. No ice, no lemon, no special requests. He thanked her by name, having clearly read her nameplate, another small but noticeable difference from the usual first-class interactions where passengers rarely acknowledged crew members personally. As Flight 247 climbed to its cruising altitude, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would be different from the countless others in her career. Something about the passenger in 14C suggested a story waiting to unfold at 35,000 feet, one that would challenge her understanding of first impressions and perhaps change more than just her typical routine. The seatbelt sign dinged off, signaling the beginning of the 6-hour journey to San Francisco. Sarah straightened her uniform once more, ready to provide the impeccable service her airline was known for, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday morning flight would become one of the most memorable of her career. The first hour of Flight 247 proceeded smoothly as the aircraft cruised above the cloud layer. Sarah moved through her service routine with practiced grace, noting how Morrison maintained his peculiar balance of being both present and unobtrusive. While other first-class passengers immersed themselves in their tablets or dozed beneath designer eye masks, he remained quietly observant. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom, warning of approaching turbulence over the Midwest. Dark clouds loomed ahead, their massive formations visible through the windows. Sarah efficiently secured the cabin, her experienced hands quickly stowing loose items and checking seatbacks. The first jolts came suddenly, causing drinks to slosh and passengers to grip their armrests. Sarah noticed Morrison's calm demeanor didn't waver. Instead, his attention shifted to the elderly woman across the aisle who had begun to show signs of distress. The turbulence intensified and the cabin lights flickered briefly. "Ma'am," he spoke softly to the elderly passenger, his voice steady despite the plane's movement. "Try focusing on the horizon line. It helps with the motion." He demonstrated by pointing out the window, showing her how to maintain a fixed gaze on the distant clouds. Sarah watched this interaction while securing herself in the jump seat, impressed by his knowledge of anti-motion sickness techniques. The elderly woman, who had introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson during boarding, visibly relaxed under his gentle guidance. The aircraft encountered another rough patch, more severe than the first. The seatbelt sign chimed insistently, and Sarah rose to check on passengers who might need assistance. To her surprise, Morrison had already helped Mrs. Patterson adjust her oxygen mask, which had fallen during the turbulence. 2 rows ahead, a young boy, no more than 7, began crying softly. His mother, battling motion sickness herself, struggled to comfort him. Morrison caught Sarah's eye and gestured subtly, asking permission to help. She nodded, recognizing his genuine concern. "Hey, buddy," he called out, his voice carrying just enough to reach the boy without disturbing others. "Did you know airplanes are like swimming dolphins? They love dancing through air currents." His creative description transformed the frightening turbulence into something magical for the child. The boy's tears subsided as Morrison continued his improvised story about aerial dolphins and cloud dancing. Other passengers, initially tense from the rough flight, found themselves smiling at the imaginative tale. Sarah noticed how this simple intervention had shifted the entire cabin's atmosphere from anxiety to calm. As the turbulence gradually subsided, Sarah approached Morrison's seat. "Thank you for your help," she said quietly. "You seemed very experienced with flight situations." He smiled warmly. "Let's just say I've spent quite a bit of time in the air." Something in his tone suggested there was more to his story, but before Sarah could inquire further, the plane hit another pocket of rough air. Without missing a beat, Morrison steadied a falling tablet for the businessman next to him, preventing it from hitting the floor. The device's owner, who had been sleeping, awoke startled but grateful. Sarah couldn't help but notice how Morrison's reflexes seemed almost practiced, as if he'd anticipated the need before it arose. The remaining patches of turbulence passed more smoothly, partly thanks to Morrison's continued calm influence on nearby passengers. He shared his travel mints with those feeling queasy and offered reassuring smiles to nervous flyers. His actions, while technically breaking protocol about remaining seated, seemed to create a bubble of comfort in his section of the cabin. Sarah found herself torn between enforcing standard safety procedures and acknowledging the positive impact he was having on passenger comfort. In her 12 years of flying, she'd never encountered someone who so naturally balanced passenger welfare with practical assistance. As the skies cleared and the flight stabilized, Sarah began preparation for the meal service. She glanced at Morrison's seat, wondering what other surprises this unusual passenger might have in store. The incident had raised more questions than answers about the mysterious man in 14C, and something told her this was just the beginning of an extraordinary flight. As the meal service commenced, Sarah noticed the distinctive aroma of gourmet cookies wafting through the first-class cabin. To her surprise, Morrison had produced a carefully packed box of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. The scent caught the attention of a young college student in economy who had wandered forward, seeking the lavatory. The student, wearing a worn university sweatshirt and carrying a textbook, looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggested long hours of studying, and Sarah overheard her mumbling about missing breakfast to make the early flight. Morrison noticed, too, and what happened next exemplified his peculiar talent for simple yet meaningful gestures. "Excuse me," he called softly to the student. "I have some extra cookies here from a wonderful bakery in Manhattan. Would you care for some?" He extended the box, its golden contents still slightly warm. The student's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and gratitude crossing her face. Sarah observed the interaction while arranging meal trays. The student, who introduced herself as Emma, was flying to attend her grandmother's surgery. She had used her semester's food budget for the last-minute ticket, explaining her hungry state. Morrison listened intently, then discreetly pulled out an extra sandwich he had brought aboard. "I always pack too much," he said, though Sarah suspected this wasn't entirely true. The small act of kindness brought tears to Emma's eyes, and several nearby passengers found themselves touched by the scene. As Sarah continued her service routine, she watched how this simple interaction sparked a chain reaction throughout the cabin. A businessman who had witnessed the exchange ordered an extra meal to share with the student. Another passenger offered her airline miles to upgrade Emma's return flight. Morrison's influence seemed to dissolve the invisible barriers that typically separated passengers. The first-class cabin, usually an oasis of individual isolation, transformed into a space of shared humanity. Even the most reserved passengers found themselves drawn into quiet conversations and small acts of kindness. However, Sarah's professional training nagged at her consciousness. Despite the positive atmosphere Morrison had created, his frequent movements and interactions with other cabins technically violated airline protocol. She knew she needed to address these infractions, regardless of their well-intentioned nature. With her clipboard in hand, Sarah approached seat 14C during a quiet moment. "Sir, while I appreciate your kindness," she began professionally, "I need to discuss some safety concerns." Morrison turned to her with attentive eyes, his expression open and respectful. Before she could continue, a call button chimed from economy. Through the curtain, Sarah could see an elderly passenger struggling with his medication bag stored in the overhead compartment. Morrison glanced back too, already half rising from his seat. "Please," Sarah said firmly, "allow me to handle this. It's important that passengers remain in their assigned cabins unless using the facilities." Her tone was kind but resolute, embodying the authority her position required. Morrison settled back, nodding in understanding. Yet something in his eyes, a mixture of amusement and approval, caught Sarah off guard. He reached into his worn leather messenger bag, retrieving what appeared to be a business card. "You're absolutely right about protocol," he began, his voice carrying a new note of authority that hadn't been present before. "Safety should never be compromised, even in the name of helping others." Sarah's hand hesitated above the card he offered. In her years of service, she'd received countless business cards from passengers attempting to leverage their position. Yet Morrison's demeanor suggested something different, not a challenge to her authority, but rather an explanation for his unusual behavior. As her fingers closed around the embossed card, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would mark a turning point in her career. The simple piece of cardstock she held seemed to carry more weight than its physical presence suggested, and the mystery of the passenger in seat 14C was about to unravel in an unexpected way. Sarah's professional composure wavered for just a moment as her eyes scanned the business card. The embossed silver lettering caught the cabin light, revealing the words James Morrison, Chief Executive Officer of Skyline Airways, the very airline she had served faithfully for 12 years. Her fingers trembled slightly as the realization sank in. The worn jeans, the simple t-shirt, the unassuming demeanor, suddenly everything clicked into place. She recalled fragments of the company newsletter she'd skimmed last month, announcing the appointment of a new CEO who had started from the ground up. In her rush to check her upcoming schedule, she bypassed the executive profiles section entirely. Sarah began, then caught herself, years of training kicking in despite her surprise. The same man she'd been preparing to reprimand was effectively her highest-ranking superior. Yet Morrison's expression remained unchanged, carrying the same gentle warmth he'd shown to every passenger. "Please, Don't let this change anything, he said quietly, noticing her internal struggle. Your dedication to protocol is exactly what makes this airline exceptional. He gestured to the clipboard she still held, where she'd begun documenting his movements between cabins. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. Other passengers remained oblivious to the subtle drama unfolding, continuing their conversations, many of which had been sparked by Morrison's earlier acts of kindness. "Sir, I apologize if I seemed." Sarah started again, but Morrison raised his hand gently. "Sarah, may I share something with you?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough to ensure privacy. "I've spent the last 3 months flying on our routes, sometimes in first class, sometimes in economy. Do you know what I've learned?" She shook her head, still processing the revelation. The CEO had been right under her nose, breaking minor protocols while simultaneously creating the most harmonious cabin environment she'd experienced in years. "I've learned that our greatest strength isn't in our new planes or our route network," he continued. "It's in people like you, crew members who maintain standards even when faced with what appears to be a difficult passenger." A call button chimed somewhere in economy, but another flight attendant attended to it. Sarah remained rooted in place, captivated by the unprecedented conversation. "The newsletters probably mentioned my background," Morrison continued, straightening a stack of magazines in the seat pocket. "But they couldn't capture why I believe in experiencing our service firsthand. Every position, from baggage handler to CEO, shapes our passenger's journey." Sarah thought about the morning's events in a new light. His helpful nature with bags suddenly made sense, given his starting position with the company. His comfort during turbulence spoke to years of flight experience. Even his simple request for water revealed an understanding of cabin service efficiency. "Your supervisor submitted a report last month," he said, surprising her again, "about how you handled an emergency landing in Denver. She mentioned your exceptional ability to balance passenger comfort with safety protocols." The memory of that challenging flight surfaced, a medical emergency that had required quick thinking and strict adherence to procedures while maintaining calm among nervous passengers. "That report was one of the reasons I chose this flight," Morrison admitted. "I wanted to see firsthand the kind of crew member who could earn such praise. Your handling of my own protocol violations today only confirms what I read." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her recognized professionalism, lingering embarrassment about nearly reporting the CEO, and a growing understanding of the unique leadership style she was witnessing. "Now," Morrison said, reaching for his leather messenger bag again, "I believe you have some legitimate concerns about cabin safety to discuss with me." His eyes twinkled with gentle humor, but his tone conveyed serious respect for her position. In that moment, Sarah understood that this encounter would reshape her understanding of not just leadership, but of how small acts of kindness could transform the entire flying experience. The clipboard in her hands no longer felt like a tool for enforcement, but rather a symbol of the standards that made their airline special. The galley provided a quiet sanctuary during the mid-flight lull, while other passengers dozed under soft blue cabin lights. Sarah found herself sharing coffee with the CEO of Skyline Airways. Morrison had suggested the informal meeting, recognizing the need to explain his unconventional approach to leadership. "Cream, no sugar," he said, accepting the airline-branded paper cup. "Just like I had it 20 years ago, working the midnight shift at Chicago O'Hare." His eyes carried a distant look, remembering where his journey began. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the ambient hum of the aircraft, creating an atmosphere of unexpected intimacy. Sarah listened intently as Morrison described his first role with the airline. "I was part of the baggage team," he explained, rotating his coffee cup slowly. Every bag told a story: wedding dresses for destination ceremonies, musical instruments for traveling musicians, medical supplies for emergency situations. I learned that airlines don't just transport people, we transport their dreams, hopes, and necessities. The galley cart rattled slightly as they hit a small pocket of turbulence. Morrison steadied his cup with the instinctive motion of someone who'd spent countless hours in the air. After baggage handling, I moved to customer service at the ticket counter. That's where I really learned about the human side of aviation. He shared stories about helping passengers during snowstorms, coordinating with crew members during delays, and witnessing both the joy and heartbreak that airports regularly host. Each position he held added another layer to his understanding of the airline industry's complexity. But it was my time as a flight attendant that truly shaped my vision for the company, Morrison revealed, surprising Sarah. 3 years in the air, experiencing exactly what you do every day. The challenges, the rewards, the responsibility of keeping everyone safe while making them feel cared for. Sarah found herself nodding, understanding how his earlier interactions with passengers reflected this experience. His ability to anticipate needs and calm anxieties suddenly made perfect sense. He'd lived it himself. The corporate ladder followed. He continued, Operations Management, Regional Director, VP of Customer Experience. But I made a promise to myself, never forget what it feels like on the front lines. He paused, meeting Sarah's eyes. That's why I fly like this, experiencing our service as our passengers do. The conversation shifted as Morrison shared his observations from 3 months of undercover flights. He'd noticed patterns, how different crews handled similar situations, where procedures sometimes created unnecessary friction, and most importantly, where small acts of kindness made extraordinary differences. Today's flight, he said, gesturing toward the cabin, watching you balance safety protocols with passenger care. It confirmed something I've suspected. Our best service comes when we empower our crew to make informed judgments while maintaining our standards. Sarah thought about the morning's events, how close she'd come to filing a report about his behavior. Even though I was preparing to document your actions, she asked, still slightly embarrassed. Morrison's face lit up with genuine appreciation. Especially then, he emphasized. You saw someone potentially compromising safety protocols and were ready to address it, regardless of how well-intentioned those actions seemed. That's exactly what we need. The call button chimed softly, signaling the end of their impromptu meeting. Before Sarah returned to her duties, Morrison shared one final thought. You know, the view from the executive office is comprehensive, but it's also distant. These flights remind me that our real success happens here, at 35,000 feet, in countless small moments between our crew and passengers. As Sarah prepared for the final service phase of the flight, she reflected on their conversation. Morrison's journey from baggage handler to CEO suddenly seemed less like a corporate success story and more like a masterclass in understanding every aspect of the airline industry. The galley still held the lingering aroma of coffee as Sarah stored their cups away. Something had shifted in her perception, not just of Morrison or her role, but of how leadership could manifest in the most unexpected ways at the most unexpected times. The flight entered its final stages as the California coastline appeared on the horizon. During beverage service, Morrison signaled Sarah for a brief conversation. Rather than just requesting a drink, he posed an unexpected question that would reshape the airline's future. Sarah, you've seen both sides of today's situation, he began, keeping his voice low. As a professional flight attendant ensuring safety, and as someone witnessing attempts to enhance passenger experience, what will you change about our service model? Sarah paused, carefully considering her response. Years of observation and passenger interaction had given her insights she'd never expected to share with the CEO. May I be completely honest, sir? Please, he encouraged, and it's James when we're discussing improvements. His genuine interest gave her the confidence to continue. We have amazing protocols for safety and service, she began, arranging her thoughts. But sometimes they create invisible barriers between crew and passengers. Today, watching you interact with everyone, I realized we could maintain our high standards while adding a more personal touch. Morrison nodded encouragingly as she continued. For instance, the young student Emma. Our current policies wouldn't have allowed me to address her hunger beyond offering to sell her a snack box. Yet your simple act of sharing food created a ripple effect of kindness throughout the cabin. What would you suggest? Morrison asked, taking notes on his phone. The setting sun cast a warm glow through the window, illuminating the sincerity in his expression. Sarah's ideas flowed naturally, born from thousands of hours in the air. What if we had a comfort fund for each flight? Small gestures like offering a complimentary meal to a struggling passenger or having basic necessities available for those who might need them. Morrison's eyes lit up. Continue, he urged, his fingers typing rapidly. We could also revise our cross-cabin interaction policies, she suggested. Currently, we discourage first-class passengers from sharing their extra amenities with economy. But today showed how such sharing can transform the entire flight atmosphere. The conversation expanded as Sarah shared more observations, how certain safety briefings could be made more engaging, ways to help nervous flyers feel more secure, and ideas for empowering crew members to make judgment calls in unique situations. There's something else, she added, thinking of the morning's events. Your approach today, helping others while remaining unassuming. It created a unique environment. Passengers followed your example, treating each other and the crew with increased kindness. Morrison set down his phone, his expression thoughtful. What you're describing goes beyond customer service. It's about creating a community at 35,000 feet, even if just for a few hours. Exactly, Sarah agreed, growing more animated. We could train crew members to facilitate these connections naturally, while maintaining professional boundaries and safety standards. The plane began its initial descent into San Francisco, the city's iconic skyline emerging through scattered clouds. Morrison quickly outlined what would become known as the Sky Bridge Initiative, a comprehensive program combining Sarah's suggestions with his experiences from undercover flights. This is exactly why I needed to experience our flights firsthand, he said, securing his tray table. Sometimes the best innovations come from conversations exactly like this one. As the aircraft descended, they refined the concept further. The program would balance enhanced passenger experience with strict safety protocols, creating a new standard for airline service that wouldn't compromise their core responsibilities. Sarah, Morrison said just before the final approach, would you consider taking a leading role in developing this program? Your understanding of both passenger needs and operational requirements would be invaluable. The offer caught her by surprise, but before she could respond, the captain announced their final descent. Sarah returned to her duties, her mind racing with possibilities. The day had transformed from a routine flight into an opportunity to influence the future of airline service. As the plane touched down smoothly on San Francisco's runway, both Sarah and Morrison knew that this flight had marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a new approach to air travel that would prioritize both safety and human connection. The training room at Skyline Airways headquarters buzzed with anticipation as Sarah prepared to welcome the first group of executives participating in the Skybridge program. Large windows offered a panoramic view of aircraft taking off and landing, serving as a perfect backdrop for this innovative initiative. Sarah adjusted the presentation screen, reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful flight. Her new role as Director of Passenger Experience allowed her to bridge the gap between corporate decisions and real-world implementation. The simple navy blazer she wore now carried a different significance, representing not just authority, but understanding. Good morning, she began, addressing the 20 executives seated before her. Today marks the beginning of something unique in the airline industry. Over the next month, each of you will experience our airline from a different perspective, not as executives, but as regular passengers. The room's energy shifted as Sarah shared her story about the flight with James Morrison. The executives leaned forward, particularly interested in how their CEO's undercover journey had sparked this revolutionary program. Photos from recent test flights scrolled across the screen, showing the positive impacts of their new approach. We've already seen remarkable results from our pilot program, Sarah continued, pulling up the latest satisfaction metrics. Customer happiness has increased by 27% on flights implementing the new protocols. But more importantly, we've created genuine connections between passengers and crew. She described the program's key innovations: the Comfort Fund that allowed crew members to offer assistance to passengers in need, the Community Connection Initiative that facilitated positive interactions between cabins, and the enhanced training that helped staff balance safety with compassion. Yesterday, one of our flight attendants used the Comfort Fund to provide a meal to a military service member who'd missed his connection, Sarah shared. By the end of the flight, other passengers had collected business cards to help with his job search after deployment. These are the moments we're cultivating. The executives participated in practical exercises, learning how to handle bags, serve meals, and navigate the complex choreography of in-flight service. Sarah watched as understanding dawned on their faces, the same realization she'd had about the importance of experiencing their service firsthand. "Your assignments for the next month are in these envelopes," she announced, distributing them personally. "Some of you will fly economy, others first class. You'll experience delays, weather issues, and regular flight challenges. The only rule is no special treatment." Questions flew around the room. How can we handle recognized by staff? What if there's an emergency? Sarah addressed each concern, emphasizing the importance of authentic experience. She caught sight of Morrison standing quietly at the back of the room, nodding in approval. "Remember," she concluded, "we're not just transporting passengers from point A to point B. We're creating experiences that reflect our humanity." The words echoed those Morrison had shared with her in the galley 3 months ago, but now they carried the weight of proven success. After the session, Morrison joined her at the podium. "You've taken this beyond what I imagined," he said, reviewing the presentation materials. "The program's success is exceeding our highest projections." Sarah smiled, remembering her initial hesitation about taking on this role. "It works because it's real," she replied. "We're not just teaching service techniques, we're showing our team how to create meaningful connections while maintaining professional standards." Through the windows, they watched the Skyline Airways plane lift into the afternoon sky. Somewhere aboard, a crew member might be offering a kind gesture that would spark a chain reaction of goodwill, just as Morrison had done on that memorable flight. Next week's group includes board members, Morrison mentioned, gathering his notes. They were skeptical at first, but the numbers have convinced them. "Your program is changing our airline's culture, one flight at a time." As the executives filed out, Sarah began preparing for the afternoon session. The Skybridge program had become more than just a training initiative. It was proving that excellence in airline service could coexist with genuine human connection. In her new role, she was helping to reshape not just their airline, but the industry's approach to passenger experience. The modern training facility of Skyline Airways now features a wall of photographs, each telling a story of extraordinary service. At the center hangs a simple image: a flight attendant serving coffee to a casually dressed passenger in seat 14C. New trainees often gather around this photo, listening intently as Sarah Chen shares the story that transformed their airline. Every interaction at 35,000 feet has the potential to change lives. Sarah begins, addressing the latest class of flight attendants. Her position as Executive Director of Training and Passenger Experience carries the wisdom of countless flights and the lessons learned from that remarkable day 5 years ago. The training room embraces a unique atmosphere designed to replicate an aircraft cabin while maintaining a comfortable learning environment. Today's session focuses on what has become known as the Morrison Method, balancing professional protocol with genuine human connection. "Let me share something that happened last week," Sarah continues, engaging her audience. "One of our crews encountered a young musician whose guitar had been damaged during her journey to an important audition. Instead of simply filing a claim, they utilized our Comfort Fund to arrange an emergency repair during her layover. The trainees exchanged glances, already familiar with the program's reputation for creating memorable moments. Sarah advances her presentation to show the aftermath. A viral social media post of the musician performing an impromptu concert in the gate area, surrounded by smiling passengers and crew members. "This is what we mean by transformative service," she explains. "It's not about grand gestures, but rather understanding and responding to human needs while maintaining our safety standards. The philosophy that began with Morrison's undercover journey has evolved into a comprehensive approach to airline service. James Morrison, though now semi-retired, still flies regularly as a regular passenger. His legacy lives on through the program he inspired, and occasionally he visits these training sessions, sitting quietly in the back, wearing his characteristic simple attire. Today is one such day. Our airline's success isn't measured solely by on-time performance or profit margins, Sarah continues, noting Morrison's presence with a warm smile. It's measured by the stories our passengers share, the connections they make, and the trust they place in us to carry not just their bodies, but their dreams across the sky. She proceeds to demonstrate practical scenarios, teaching new crew members how to recognize opportunities for meaningful intervention while respecting boundaries and maintaining safety protocols. The lessons incorporate real situations from the thousands of positive encounters documented since the program's inception. Remember, Sarah emphasizes, every passenger has a story. Some are flying to job interviews, others to weddings or funerals. Some are anxious first-time flyers, while others are seasoned travelers having a difficult day. Your ability to read these situations and respond appropriately is as crucial as your safety training. The day's session concludes with a tradition that began shortly after the SkyBridge program's implementation. Each trainee receives a simple business card holder, a subtle reminder of the moment Sarah received Morrison's card and how it sparked a revolution in airline service. After the trainees depart, Morrison approaches Sarah's podium. 5 years, he reflects, and every class still gets the same look of inspiration I saw in your eyes that day. His casual attire remains unchanged, a reminder that true leadership transcends appearance. Sarah gathers her materials, thinking of how far they've come. The airline's transformation has attracted industry attention, with competitors struggling to understand how Skyline achieves its remarkable passenger satisfaction scores while maintaining stellar safety records. It works because it's real, Sarah responds, echoing the words she first spoke in that executive training room years ago. We're not just teaching them to serve, we're showing them how to care while staying professional. As they walk through the terminal, they pass crews embodying the principles they've worked so hard to instill. The airline's culture has evolved into something unique in the industry, a perfect blend of efficiency, safety, and genuine human connection. The sound of jet engines fills the air as another Skyline Airways flight takes off, carrying with it the promise of extraordinary service. Sarah watches it climb, knowing that somewhere aboard, another story of kindness at 35,000 feet is about to unfold.